Hello and welcome to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. We finally made it here live on April 22nd, the start of draft week. The draft is only a few days away. On Thursday is when the first round will be underway. To start the week, I have a lot of stories to talk up to leading up into the draft, starting with today, starting with one of the biggest stories over the last weekend, Dak Prescott mentioning something to local media, maybe not wanting to be the highest paid quarterback, what that could mean for the Dallas Cowboys. I'll get into that in just a few seconds. Then the Minnesota Vikings head coach, Kevin O'Connell, now has revealed that he has been searching for the next franchise quarterback, has a good feeling, needs to have a good feeling about the next quarterback in order to take that next step. This draft is as good as any, so we'll see if they finally pull the trigger on that, if they're able to trade up. Then later in the show, we're going to get into the biggest breaking news that dropped today around another quarterback in the AFC. So stick around to find out who that was and what my thoughts were on that. Before I wrap it up with reacting to some of the new uniforms that came out recently. Today, the Broncos revealed their new uniforms they're going to wear in 2024. And I didn't get a chance to talk about the Lions' new uniforms, so we're also going to dive into those as well. A great show planned for you guys today. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as both YouTube channels. And before I start on the first segment, like I always do, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments you want to make during the live show, to use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. Using this link, I'm able to see your question or comment pop up in the chat box. I can read it on air, and the conversation can carry on that way. It's a lot more engaging, conversational, and I think it's more fun that way. It's a big help for the show, as well as all the other shows across the network as well. So again, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. We thank you guys greatly every time you guys are able to do that with any of your comments or questions. In saying that, we can jump into one of the biggest stories, Dak Prescott, more on his contract development. As it stands right now, Dak is 1 year away from free agency. If he resigns, everyone expects him. The rumor has been for him to get a large contract. It has been thrown around $60 million, maybe more per year, $60 million or more per year for a new contract. That's what's been reported. That's what's been thrown around out there. And I've been on the side of, if it's that much, I find it very hard to give Dak that kind of contract with that high of a salary. But you have to think again where the Cowboys find themselves at this point. Can they withstand a rebuild of some sort, a reset at the quarterback position with a win-now-ready team? That's a question they have to think about, but again, the money does talk. So $60 million for Dak, how much better can you really get? All that has to pay into this sort of decision that the Cowboys have to make. And it already has been reported that the Cowboys and Dak have mutually agreed that most likely nothing's going to occur this offseason, at least not before the draft. The draft is basically already here. So if anything were to happen, maybe towards the summer, something could be worked out then again, but you also have CeeDee's contract that is also a priority, so I wouldn't be surprised if the Cowboys prioritize that instead of Dak and have Dak just play out this last year. It's looking more and more likely that this could be his last year. But recently, at a charity event this past Friday, Dak sort of disproved some of those rumors, some of those numbers that have been thrown out there for his contract, and he revealed that even though the talks haven't begun yet officially with the Cowboys, he has had a preliminary, a just brief conversation with Jerry Jones a few weeks ago about the situation. Probably nothing in depth, but it just came up in conversation with Jerry Jones. And on Friday at his charity event, Dak made sure to mention that he said, I'm not trying to be the highest paid necessarily. I'll wait until negotiations begin and obviously want to put this team in the best situation. Now, that comes a little bit more, pretty more open, a bit more adjustable to what this team needs. Before, when these contract reports came out, it seemed like Dak was looking out for himself, trying to get the best deal for him. He's earned it, definitely, over the past few years, playing the way he has. They haven't seen the playoff success, so that's obviously a massive thing. But just in terms of regular season, you can't name too many quarterbacks putting up those numbers, and people take it for granted. It's really not an easy thing for Dak to just go out there. Of course, he has the weapons, the all-world talent, but again, not a lot of quarterbacks, I believe, would put up those numbers. And I just think people sometimes take it for granted a little bit, what Dak's been doing in the regular season. Without that, they don't even make the playoffs. So that's still a huge part of this whole equation that you have to consider with Dak. And, he's keeping his options open, saying that he doesn't want to necessarily be the highest paid quarterback is pretty massive, just because it does open the door a little bit to kind of be lenient, maybe a little bit with the Cowboys, see what is a team-friendly deal, if that applies to Dak Prescott, if he wants to really pursue that direction. Maybe they could work something out there. I still expect them to probably make over $50 million per year. The highest paid right now is Joe Burrow at 55. I don't think he'll be within 2 to 3 million of that. Maybe he'll get 50 max. But I don't see him making more than that per year. I don't think the Cowboys can afford that, quite honestly, per year. I expect him to be around that range, 50 max per year, depending also how long the contract is, if it's for 4 years, 3 years. All those details have to be worked out. But this is a good development if you're a Cowboys fan, if you're anybody in the organization, that Dak is saying, it doesn't have to be the highest necessarily. It doesn't have to be these market-setting numbers for him. He's at a point in his career that I truly think that Dak would just want to win and be somewhere that he can win. There's a lot more options out there, obviously, if he hits free agency to earn money and maybe be on a better team, but you just have to be cautious with that, because always the grass isn't always greener on the other side. That's always thrown around. So he has to be wary of that. How much better, truly, can you get talent-wise than the Cowboys? It would be hard to find, but not impossible. It's just a risk. And speaking of risk, playing out the last year on his deal, which seems to be the route that they're going to go, is a bit risky, because he is playing on that last year of that 4-year, $160 million deal. And the risk is obviously injury. If you get injured, how much does that affect your market value in free agency in 2025? Something that Dak has lived already in the past. In 2020, when he was playing on that franchise tag, he suffered that very serious ankle injury. And that really put everything into question. It put his contract in jeopardy. You saw him on the field. He seemed devastated, obviously, because it was a serious injury. I don't know how much, if any, of that regular season he played out. But luckily for him, he still earned a big deal in 2021, that $160 million deal. So it didn't completely crumble for Dak Prescott, but running that risk again somewhat does raise a few eyebrows there if he really wants to commit to that. That's his choice. You don't plan for injury. It'll just happen. But, it is a risk there. That's still something that you have to consider, playing on your last deal with no real guarantees after this year. But even so, with the risk and everything in question, Dak didn't seem hesitant about either option, about re-signing with the Cowboys or maybe testing out free agency. When he said at his charity event, I'm not going to say I fear being here or not. I don't fear either situation, to be candid with you. I love this game and love to play and love to better myself as a player and my teammates around me. Right now, it's with the Dallas Cowboys. It's where I want to be, and it's where I am, and it's the focus. After this season, we'll see where we're at. And that seems a bit more open, a bit just very candid and just straight up with the way Dak Prescott has been saying it. Almost like whatever happens, happens. He's satisfied with staying with the Cowboys. He's used to it. He's comfortable there. No issue staying there. But also, he doesn't seem bothered by the idea that this could be the last year. Of course, you'd think there's some emotional connection there. You don't want to leave the team that drafted you. You've been there for so long. But Dak so far just seems really unbothered by it, unafraid, like he said, about moving on or staying with the Cowboys, when last month he was saying that he was definitely confident that a deal could be worked out with the Cowboys. Now saying something like this, being a bit more 50-50 on it, it seems, that could also just raise a few more questions and definitely push you towards thinking, this could really start to become a reality if Dak almost seems to be accepting it, seems to be embracing the uncertainty. If he's accepting it, maybe other fans and people should start coming to the realization that this could really be the last year with this core group of players together in Dallas. And then further down the line, obviously, you have to plan accordingly, but it will start with the draft and how confident you are in what you have in-house compared to what you can get in free agency maybe next year or in the draft this year. That's been the talk of the last 2 weeks. Should the Cowboys draft a quarterback to find some sort of certainty if Dak were to move on? I don't see it as a viable option, but that's certainly been a conversation. Like I mentioned before, it's certainly relieving to hear Dak say he doesn't want to be the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, but that just plays all into the timing of the CD deal and the Dak deal, which is pretty interesting. It just popped into my head when I was writing the notes for this and just thinking of these sort of strategic moves you make in contract negotiations. You think of it first starting with CD, not showing up to the voluntary workouts, almost holding out. You have to wait until OTAs and mini camp and training camp to see if it's, a legit holdout. But he has shown the first initial signs of, warning the Cowboys, if you will, that, hey, this contract thing, if it doesn't work out, I'm already not showing up to these voluntary ones, which a lot of people already don't show up to. But it does serve as a little bit of a warning that he's not afraid to potentially hold out the rest of the offseason, and the Cowboys don't want that, don't want another distraction. So that was the first move. CD made the first move in trying to jump the line to get a contract extension. Now, if you think about it, Dak makes the next move in response to CD's and says now, hey, you know what? I don't want to be the highest paid quarterback. That is not my goal. I can be open to working on a team-friendly deal. So now the Cowboys are thinking, whoa, wait a minute now. Dak doesn't want all this money. Well, maybe we should work with him first and maybe work out something with Dak. And CD could wait a little bit longer, put it off a little bit. He's not in no rush. Quarterback is held to the highest of standard. If our quarterback is saying he's willing to work with us, maybe we look into him a little bit sooner rather than CD, who's an all-world talent coming off a career year. He's expected a lot of money just based off what he played. That might not benefit the Cowboys so much compared to Dak now saying he's willing to work with the team in some way. That was just what I thought of it. It is sort of like a behind-the-scenes inner sort of chess match that these teams, these agents are trying to work out with the Cowboys to try and get their agent signed. Dak is saying one thing, CD saying another to try and jump the line a little bit. It's all very, very sneaky in a way. It's very interesting to look at it this way and see what the Cowboys now do in response to Dak saying this. Will they start negotiations with CD? Do they now push Dak to the front of the line? Where does Micah's contract all play into this? All of this has to be worked out on top of filling out your roster this coming Thursday in the draft. So the Cowboys have a lot of things to work out. This is certainly, above all else, something positive for the Cowboys, regardless if they sign Dak first, sign CD first, don't sign either of them, sign both of them. This is still overall a positive thing for the Cowboys if Dak is willing to work with them. It could also mean, on the positive side, that they could afford now both of them if CD wants all this money and Dak is willing to submit a little bit to some of his demands and be a bit more open and team friendly, that could work out to the best for the Dallas Cowboys and this roster. You just have to see how it all works out. The financial side, I always say it takes a lot more with discussing the details, the guarantees, the opt-outs and stuff like that. So after the draft, I'm sure we're going to see a bit more of a clearer picture with this whole situation, but it definitely should overall seem as a positive thing for the Cowboys for Dak to come out and say something like this. Now the Cowboys actually have to do something about it. Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones have to take that step now and start negotiations with Dak and CD, because both of them have certainly earned any sort of contract that's coming their way. And you don't want to run the risk of losing your star quarterback in free agency, because I guarantee some team out there will give him a lot of money, and then the Cowboys will just be left with their hands in their pockets, just without a quarterback. So that's something they have to work out. I'm sure it's a priority. They've said it. Now we just have to see it. But in the meantime, we'll leave that topic there. I'm sure I'm going to revisit it sometime in the future. But we're going to move on with the show. And in the next segment after the break, we're going to talk about Kevin O'Connell and his search for the perfect quarterback that he has allegedly already spent a couple seasons, off seasons, looking for. He just needs to be 100% sure the next quarterback they draft is the guy. He talked about it over the weekend and his sort of thought process into that. We're going to dive into that in just a few seconds, so stick around. More coming up on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on their fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to continue on with our next segment. Around the Minnesota Vikings, probably the most fascinating team in the draft because of that capital they hold in the first round, holding their own pick at 11, plus the Houston Texans pick they acquired in a trade about a month ago to acquire the number 23 overall pick in the first round. And now most people, like me, believe that now the Minnesota Vikings need a quarterback because they obviously lost Kirk Cousins in free agency. And in saying that, it's funny how these things work with Kirk and losing him, seeing like a sudden sort of action that just happened. They tried to sign him and just out of nowhere he signed with the Falcons, and how it seems like that. But based on what Kevin O'Connell now said recently, at a Faith in Life service last week, and looking at just the possibility of the Vikings potentially having reached their ceiling with Kirk Cousins at the helm. He's been there a few years now. I'm sure not a lot of people have thought of Kirk Cousins as getting that much better, developing into something different that we already haven't seen. It's probably fair to say that this team has reached their ceiling with Kirk, at least in my opinion, from what I've seen recently, how good their team is. They've addressed a lot of stuff over the past few years. Justin Jefferson's in there, Jordan Addison's in there. They've put up numbers, but it just seems like they were always missing something, falling short, and they were getting to a point where I don't think we were gonna see any more growth out of this team, surpassing anything that we haven't seen out of them before. And maybe it all worked out surprisingly for the best with them moving on from Kirk Cousins, because now, like I mentioned, they have that draft capital. And Kevin O'Connell was speaking at that Faith in Life series last week, and he was asked about the quarterback situation, and he gave a pretty interesting response that surprised me a little bit because of his approach to looking for this next quarterback. He said specifically, for a couple of years, I've been kind of known as the quarterback killer when it comes to the draft and Egan, because the feeling that I feel from our fan base is when we get this next guy, he's going to be the guy. I feel it. I know you guys all feel it. So I have to, in a lot of ways, fight off mistakes from being made, mainly because the evaluation process I go through, I think about the things that are fixable. Then he goes on and mentions how he really believes in the quarterback principles and just the personal principles of that quarterback who's going to come in and be the leader, be the face of this franchise. He mentioned how he holds that to a high standards, and that the other things are really fixable with coaching. He really looks at the person and the sort of principles and standards they hold themselves to as people outside the organization. And there was a few interesting tidbits I took away from that. In the last part of it, he said, he mentioned he's been looking at this quarterback situation for a few years now, and that surprised me already because he's only been there a handful of years, and saying years, makes you think a little bit about Kirk Cousins and maybe Kevin O'Connell also coming to the realization now that, this team has sort of reached their ceiling with Kirk. He said for a couple of years, I've been kind of known as a quarterback killer, fending off these options at quarterback because he really wants to hone in on and nail down the next quarterback and not have to reset again, have to go through this whole process again. That was one interesting thing because he said for years, sort of coming to that realization as well that I mentioned before. And now you look at this year's draft, if you really want to find the guy, this draft seems like the draft to find the quarterback, right? Because there's so many quarterbacks that you could choose from. There's been 6 mentioned this whole offseason: Michael Penix, Bo Nix, JJ, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams. They're all in this mix of some people loving Michael Penix's arm talent. The injuries are still there, though. JJ McCarthy showed out at the Combine and the Pro Day, but was he only benefiting from a great Michigan team? Caleb's going number 1, so we won't include him. Jaden Daniels won the Heisman, but does he take too many unnecessary hits? Is he too light? Those are questions. Drake May as well. Does he need to sit a year? He looks good in some throws, but other throws, he looks underdeveloped. There's always things that follow these quarterbacks. I'm sure Kevin O'Connell has spent an extended amount of time trying to find the guy. But unfortunately for him, it's not going to be as simple as just choosing from one of these guys because he is picking at the earliest at 11. And nobody thinks that any of these quarterbacks are going to fall there, at least not the top 4. I don't think they're not going to draft Bo Nix or Michael Penix in my estimation. At that point, they might as well just ride with Sam Darnold at that point because they've built up this roster a lot already. They've addressed a lot of positions on the defensive side of the ball with Jonathan Grenard coming in to replace Danielle Hunter, Blake Cashman, Alex Van Ginkel, and on offense as well. It's pretty much all settled, and it's all very good at all the skill-based positions. They added Aaron Jones as well to address the running back situation. He is just as good as what Dalvin Cook had with them in his last few prime years he had in Minnesota. So you have a great running back, Justin Jefferson if you re-sign him, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, a decent offensive line. I mentioned this before, that the Vikings, ironically, are the best spot for a quarterback to land. It just stinks because they're outside the top 10, and none of the top guys will most likely fall that far unless the Vikings trade up, and that's where the conversation has been going over the last few weeks. To make that sort of jump is going to cost them a lot, And, that's the big conundrum right now. You've improved your team so much. Do you want to almost in a way gamble away some of your future, some of your assets that you've gained or that you could gain in future picks by moving up in this year's draft? And it just comes back to the idea of Kevin O'Connell really wanting to nail down this quarterback position. And if he feels that it's not worth it, if it's not any of these quarterbacks, he doesn't feel sure about it, it seems like he's very open about just moving on with Sam Darnold and just swallowing this year, potentially not being great, and just waiting till next year if they're in a better spot. If you look back over the years to make this sort of jump, the 49ers moved up in 2021 for Trey Lance, and that cost them 3 first-round picks, and I just don't see that being worth it for the Minnesota Vikings to cost them 3 first-round picks potentially to move up. I'm a little bit weary about it unless, I have the quarterbacks stacked up as Caleb, Jaden, JJ, then Drake. So maybe Kevin O'Connell, the Vikings, have it stacked up a different way, have them ranked differently, and maybe the guy that they really like is still there. Presumably Drake May or JJ McCarthy. If that's their number one guy, Kevin O'Connell should go with it. He spent a lot more time evaluating them than I have, obviously, so if that's their guy, they should take it. But the way I have him ranked, I don't see, unless it's Jaden or JJ, him being there at 4 or 5. That it all just comes down to what the Vikings think about moving up that much. They already have 2 first-round picks, so I guess in reality, they'd only be giving away one that next year in 2025 that you don't know where they'll land. So it could be, say they do really well and it's a late first-round pick, then it all turns out great in that way. But if they're bad again, you could be giving up another top 12, top 10 pick. So you have to weigh those options out. They already have 2 first-round picks anyway this year, so I'm sure they don't really mind too much giving those away to ensure they get a great quarterback. All these are things that they have to work out. But he sounded very convinced on how and convicted about this whole situation, and it sounds like they won't settle for just, we have to draft a quarterback this year. Let's get the 5th best guy or the 4th best guy on the board and just get him because we need a quarterback. Everyone's saying that Sam Darnold's not the guy. Let's go get a quarterback this year. It is a good thing to hear Kevin O'Connell talk like this and to say he's the quarterback killer, fending off all these other options because he just didn't feel sure about it. He went with his gut, and he's rejected all these other options for a couple of years now, like he said. I think that's a pretty mature way of going about it. I'm sure the organization has had questions about it, but they seem to also trust him. They obviously know about the quarterback situation. They would want someone to come in, I'm sure, but it shows their confidence in Kevin O'Connell to ride with him. If he doesn't feel it, then they're going to stick with him and move on without a quarterback drafted. Now, the feeling from the fan base and him, they say their next guy that they do bring in is going to be the guy. He feels sure of it, so he has to really be 100% about who that next guy is. And like I mentioned before, they're going to try, but again, they just seem content with going with Sam Darnold if they have to, or just maybe finding another option, maybe going later, hoping that maybe Michael Penix or Bo Nix falls, and maybe you get more value waiting until pick 23, trading some way and see if they fall, maybe trading back a little bit more if they're still there. Those are all options that could happen. But for now, with this quarterback situation, it might not seem so black and white that they have to draft one or they're just not going to draft one and settle for other positions. It seems a lot more in-depth that they're going through, a lot more decisions that they have to go through. They've hosted almost all of them so far and had extended visits with them. Most recently, it has been Jaden Daniels, so that's raised a few eyebrows because he is expected to go number 2. So is there any realm where that could end up being a scenario? We're just going to have to wait and see. I find that's probably going to be a very high asking price with the Commanders. They've said they're not looking to trade, but at the end of the day, a lot could happen on draft day. It's one of the most exciting days in NFL and just the NFL season overall. I'm looking forward to seeing it. It sounds like the Vikings are very zoned in on their plan and sticking with it. If it pans out for them, that's great. It'll just make the NFC a lot more entertaining, a lot more fun, because I really believe, to just close out this segment, this team is really close to being in win-now mode with everything that they have. The star power, the defense is improved. Their head coach seems very offensive-minded and trying to put up points, which is what the NFL has become now. They're in a great situation that it will cost a lot to get that final piece, but if they get it, watch out for the Vikings in that division that's slowly becoming one of the more exciting ones to watch and tune into, with all this young talent and all this inexperienced young players in the league in that division. It should be something to watch in 2024. In saying that, we will close out that segment and continue on with the show. 2 more topics to come on today's episode. I mentioned the new uniforms, my reactions to the Denver Broncos and Detroit Lions uniforms in this second half of the show, as well as breaking news that dropped today around the Denver Broncos quarterback situation. Stick around to find out what happened and who the Broncos got in to be potentially their new quarterback in this new season. Don't move. A lot more is coming up on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Rolling right along with the show today, the breaking news that dropped today: Zach Wilson, the new quarterback of the Denver Broncos, traded to the Denver Broncos. It was reported earlier today at around 2 p.m. Eastern Time. By Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network. Wilson traded to the Denver Broncos for a 7th-round pick swap. The Jets are sending Zach Wilson and pick number 256 to the Denver Broncos for pick number 203 or 207. I've seen some say it's 207, others say it's 203. That'll probably get ironed out. It probably already has. I just haven't checked it. But regardless, it's a late-round swap pick in the 7th round. Basically the same pick in the 7th round. So that's what the Denver Broncos are sending them. The New York Jets will also pay some of Zach Wilson's $5.5 million salary. Roughly 5.5, around there. Not too specific on the percentages, the certain amount, but it's around there, that the Jets will also be paying some of his salary while he's a Denver Broncos player now. It is crazy to think about. Initially, just you hear the news breaks at 2:30, and I'm thinking, like, wow, Zach Wilson, the number 2 overall pick to the Jets at that time, is now basically on the Broncos, traded to them for a late 7th round pick, and basically the Jets are paying the Broncos in a way for them to take Zach Wilson and to just be on their team and just really just, I don't want to say get rid of him, because he has done some good for them coming in, backing up, has shown some great moments. Who knows who their quarterback could have been outside of Zach Wilson. Of course, you think of that, and in hindsight, who could they have gotten at number 2 in 2021? But I don't want to torture Jets fans. bringing up those sort of topics. But it is just insane to think of the value that he has dropped from number 2 to a 7th round pick. The Jets basically paying the Broncos to take him is insane. But on the bright side for Zach Wilson, he gets a fresh start in a quarterback room that now really, you don't know who could start out of any of them. It's Jarrett Stidham, Ben DiNucci, and Zach Wilson all in that quarterback room for the Denver Broncos. Not the most star-studded one, I understand that, but it just screams opportunity now for Zach Wilson, who is still only 24 years old. He'll be 25 in August, and in his 3 years in the NFL, yes, they haven't been great. Specifically, he's thrown for over 6,200 yards in 3 years, 23 touchdowns, 25 interceptions, 57% completion percentage. He had a very rough first year, but the team overall wasn't great. It wasn't a great situation for him to be in. But regardless, he played bad. The team was bad. Everything was just not good for the Jets in his first year. But then you saw the Jets start to get better. They started bringing new talent. They brought in Sauce Gardner, Quinnen Williams, these draft picks. Obviously bringing in Aaron Rodgers, drafting Garrett Wilson. The team itself around Zach Wilson got a lot better. And he wasn't projected to start. Obviously last year, it seemed like a good thing, in all honesty, that he was going to learn through Aaron Rodgers for however many years, 5 years, 3 years, 4 years. And then maybe you look at Zach Wilson after learning something from Aaron Rodgers and you're thinking, maybe this guy could carry on and keep us afloat, keep us relevant with this great talent he has around him. After a few years of learning from one of the best, why couldn't he be thrusted into starting then, which probably should have been the route that they went with once he got drafted, but he was thrown into the fire right away, and you saw how it all didn't pan out at all for them. And unfortunately for Wilson, the rest of the team got better, and he just really didn't get the opportunity, didn't show the same growth as the rest of the team. And last year, or this offseason I should say, Tyrod Taylor was also signed from the New York Giants, and he had a pretty solid season last year coming in for Daniel Jones and showing some flashes of being a reliable backup. So the writing was pretty much on the wall already with that, bringing in Tyrod. Zach's not going to start or be the second guy over Tyrod Taylor for that veteran experience. So since the NFL owners meeting, General Manager Joe Douglas has been asked about the trade situation with Zach Wilson, and since then there hasn't really been any new updates. He's kept it pretty short on that end, saying that simply he just had no updates to give. There have been talks about it, but nothing had been solidified, and it seemed like it was just going to carry on that way until after the draft, when maybe a team didn't get the quarterback they thought they would, or somebody just needed a better backup or wanted to add depth there. Maybe Zach would have been traded then. And this just came at a big surprise because you look at the Denver Broncos now, sitting at 12. They have been in that quarterback market. You've seen Bo Nix, maybe Michael Penix be mocked there in a few of these mock drafts. And you're thinking, or I thought, discussing it on this show, was that a great situation for any quarterback to go in? How would that be any different from the Zach Wilson scenario that he had with the Jets if the Broncos drafted a quarterback and expected their team to get that much better? They need a lot more pieces, and they don't have a lot of draft picks in this draft, so seeing quarterbacks be mocked there didn't make too much sense to me. And now this seems like the most reliable, valuable option that the Broncos decided to go with. I think before I mentioned Ryan Tannehill as an option. This is just as good for the Denver Broncos in my opinion, because I think it works out the best for both of them. I mentioned Zach Wilson has an opportunity now to really start and beat out Jarrett Stidham and Ben DiNucci if he really has that potential and that hype that was around him back in 2021 when he was drafted out of BYU. If that was all legit and reliable, then he should have no problem beating these two out and being the starting quarterback for the Broncos. It's great for him, but it's also great for the Broncos because now you don't feel the dying urge of trying to draft a quarterback just because the value, the abilities of these three aren't great. I think now, really, this team, the Broncos, should look and try to look at other teams that want to trade up. Maybe the Eagles, maybe the Bills. They've all been rumored to trading up. The Commanders from the second round. I would start hitting the phone, start seeing what's out there to trade for this pick. What can I get? Because this team needs a lot more quantity and quality, obviously, with these draft picks in the early rounds. Not to mention that if they could stockpile some of those picks in this year's first or second round, maybe next year first, second, or third round, it'll speed up this rebuilding process that they have after the Russell Wilson deal completely collapsed and crippled their organization, their salary cap. I would be looking to get rid of this number 12 number 12 overall pick. I just think they need a lot more than they're just going to draft a really good player at 12, most likely, but still need a lot more. And it's going to be a lot longer process to work out and drag along if you just limit yourself to these handful of picks that they have in this year's draft. I'd be looking to trade it now and just see what you have in Zach Wilson. The expectations are already low for this team. It can't get that much worse than it did last year, speaking frankly, in all honesty. So what do you really have to lose with trying out Zach Wilson and seeing what you have in him instead of drafting another quarterback and just ruining him, potentially not supporting him with the pieces around him because you don't have a lot of draft picks. The salary cap's not great. You bring in a quarterback and he only has Cortland Sutton to throw the ball to. The offensive line's all right. Javonte Williams in the backfield is a pretty solid back, but other than that, it's not going to work out great for them, and you're just going to restart this process all over again in 3 years potentially if this quarterback doesn't work out. It seems to me like the obvious decision to just trade this number 12 pick and look to the future. And that way it buys, honestly, Sean Payton some time. If they surprise some people, it looks a little bit better. They get more draft pick, and they're able to convince the fan base a little bit that this is a project that they're really investing into. It'll buy him some time around in Denver, and maybe he could stay a little bit longer. That could also work. And just to look back at that point, this overall point of not drafting a quarterback at 12, reaching for one in a way, you look back to that 2021 draft. Now, officially, with this trade of Zach Wilson, Trevor Lawrence is the only quarterback taken in the first round of that 2021 draft that is still with the team that drafted him. Trey Lance was traded from the 49ers. Justin Fields was traded from the Bears. Mac Jones was traded from the Patriots. And now Zach Wilson was traded from the New York Jets. All drafted inside the top 15. And they're all backups at this moment. Mac Jones is backing up Trevor Lawrence, ironically. Fields is a backup for now. Trey Lance is backing up Dak Prescott. Zach Wilson's the only one that now has a real opportunity, a favorable opportunity, because Justin Fields has an opportunity, but, Russell Wilson is the starter for now. All the other ones probably aren't going to see the field too much at all, or aren't likely to. So, looking at that draft and how only one quarterback is still with the team that drafted him and is still really trying to figure it out a little bit. We've seen great signs from Trevor Lawrence, but I think there's still more people expected more up to this point. So he's still really developing, still trying to get the hang of it. And the rest of them have just failed because these teams honestly just drafted them too early, drafted them with no real support to them. And you don't want that same thing happening if you're the Broncos at 12. And now, to wrap it up a little bit with this Zach Wilson opportunity, to just keep it on a positive note, I think, is he good enough to be the Broncos starter? Is it enough to not draft one or trade up at this point? I've already said it's not logical for me, if I'm the general manager, if I'm the coach, to draft one at 12 and, to say the least, trade up. I think that's just way too much. They're doing way too much with that, and they should trade down instead of up with that. I think if he's good or not, regardless, they're just going to have to stick with it and just buy this out another year with Zach Wilson. If he's good or not, that's just up to whoever's evaluating. It all just depends on the expectations. If you think the Broncos are going to be good this year and Zach Wilson's going to hold you back, I'm sorry to tell you that that's probably not what's going to happen. Not because of Zach Wilson, but because of this team just not being ready, having the skill set right now to be good. With Zach Wilson there, I think it just buys them a little bit of time to invest in other positions, then revisit the quarterback situation down the line, and then I'd be more open to drafting one in the earlier parts of the draft. But officially, Zach Wilson finds a new home. It's a new beginning for him, a new beginning for the Jets in a way as well, because now, after Aaron Rodgers, after being all in on this season, as it looks like, they're going to have to start thinking about quarterback situation as well. So that's maybe in 2 years, 3 years max. So that's something else to look out for. But for now, Zach Wilson, no longer a New York Jet, officially in the quarterback competition to start for the Denver Broncos. That's what just dropped today, the recent news around the NFL dropping on us today from all the insiders that were reporting on it. So we're going to leave it there. That's where it stands right now in just the big just conundrum of confusion of what's going to happen now. It's certainly going to affect the draft. We're just going to have to wait and see how it happens. But we're going to move on to the last segment. Lastly, talking about some of the new uniforms that dropped from the Broncos today as well, and the Detroit Lions over the weekend into last week. We're going to be back in just a few seconds to talk about those, get my reactions on those, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Thank you for joining me on this last segment of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk more about the new uniforms that have dropped for the Detroit Lions and the Denver Broncos. The Broncos have been pretty active today and over the last few days with roster changes and bringing you some new exciting news with their uniforms. So we're going to start with them. The Broncos dropped their new Mile High collection today at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and they revealed their new uniforms. The entire look of it, their whole uniform line, includes 9 different combinations that they could choose from. The color from navy blue to I want to say sunset orange is how they described it. Midnight navy, I think, is the other one, and white as well. All 3 predominant colors. Different color helmets. White and navy are the 2 colors there. I mentioned the jerseys already, the different color pants, already adding up to 9 different combinations for the Denver Broncos. Also in those just uniforms, it also includes various elements of Colorado and just the environment, the different details they added to really emphasize and show the different parts of Colorado, trying to emphasize the state, the city of Denver, and all that it has to offer. Those little details, I didn't write them down because there was a lot, and I didn't want to just overdo it with the specifics of them. I also wasn't sure about the pictures, if I was going to get in trouble for showing some pictures just because it showed up today. So you can find them anywhere online. They're trending all over social media. If you haven't seen them already, I'm sure you're going to see them, if not at some point today or later on this week. They're everywhere. They look pretty cool, in all honesty. Just my initial reaction to them. I knew of the Detroit Lions dropping. I'll get to them in a second, but the Denver Broncos, on top of the New York Jets as well, who also dropped some of their uniforms. I'm liking how different everyone's going with these uniforms, and specifically the helmets, because we talked about it before, about the new helmet safety rules, but also the design rules, how some we're going to be going all in on these new designs. I talked about it on a YouTube short. Prior to this, the Houston Texans are also going to don a new alternate helmet with a different logo on it. The Jets brought out a new whole uniform line of their different uniforms that they're going to wear. The Lions as well. And now Denver, keeping it very different, but also still rocking their orange, white, and blue. Adam Schefter reported that this was a 2-year process, actually, including input from over 10,000 fans that they surveyed, asked, as well as ownership, asking them their opinions on it, and as well as the players and what they think of it. It all turned out pretty well. The way I see it, the way I reacted to it, I thought it was a pretty cool design. My favorite one is probably they're all navies with the white helmet. It looks different, but you also still know that it's the Denver Broncos, and I think that's pretty exciting. Other than the news you get from new players coming and adding big stars to your team and the draft and everything, getting new jerseys, seeing them, city edition jerseys, color rush jerseys, third kits in soccer, whatever the deal may be, I think it's an underrated feeling fans get when they see new uniforms pop out like that. I was a fan of the Broncos one. I think it's going to look great. And if the team's not performing great, as many expect, at least they'll be looking great, which is what matters at the end of the day. So that's the Denver Broncos. I mentioned the Lions. They also dropped last week, I want to say last Thursday or Friday morning. Regardless of what it was, they also dropped a lot of new looking designs, a bit more history with this one. They unveiled their new uniforms, still the silver and blue, but it's more of a Honolulu blue, as they described it, popping out mostly on their home design, being mostly that blue with the silver accent as the secondary color. And for the away, it's all mostly white with that blue as the accent color. It looks great. Just when it dropped, it really just pops out at you. That blue is a lot lighter. And it's a throwback to their 90s look with a more modern style to it, obviously, taking away most of the gray and replacing it for white or a lighter shade of gray, if you will. In terms of that, they're all gray color rush uniforms that they were using since 2016, 2017. That will now be completely wiped away, and it will be replaced by the new all-black the all-black alternate uniforms that they're debuting once again. They haven't used those black uniforms since 2016 when they switched to the all grays for their color rush into 2017. So it's been a while, almost 9 years since they used them. And I think they look sick, honestly, the all blacks and the blues. I think it all looks great. It all works great with each other. It's mostly all black with blue accents, which I think was the right choice too. But what's funny about it is I mentioned they haven't been around since 2016. They actually freshly came out in 2003. That's when they first debuted for the Detroit Lions. And Dan Campbell, a former player of the Lions, played for Detroit in 2006 to 2008 when they really became popular and they started gaining some more fandom around them. And since then, they kind of went away. Like I mentioned in 2016, they haven't worn them for a while, and they were a fan favorite. So then, when Dan Campbell came around and he became the coach of the Detroit Lions, he came back and had a conversation with Lions president Rod Wood, where Rod Wood recapped the whole situation and actually told media in a statement. He said, "We're in the draft room literally months into his tenure, and he wore the black when he was here. He said, 'Rod, when can we get the black jerseys back?' I said, 'I'll make you a deal. When you win the division, I'll bring the black jerseys back.' So I went out on a limb. Thankfully, he delivered. That's a true story." Dan Campbell, a big fan of the black alternates. I don't want to say gambled on it. It could be looked at as that because, Dan Campbell's coming in. Everyone remembers his press conference and how eye-catching it was and how different it was, I'll say. People didn't take him seriously with that, but you see now over the last few years how serious he's been, how much he cares about this team. He wanted the black jerseys back. He was confident that he could get this team back to where he believes they should be. Luckily for all of them, it panned out. Now they're looking great. They're playing great. I'm a big fan of these black alternates. They're probably my favorite ones I've seen out of the Broncos, Jets, and obviously the Lions that they've all come out with. They look really cool. Again, you can find the picture anywhere on social media. They're trending all over. The Jets' blacks alternate uniforms are also cool, but I like how the blues pop more with the Detroit Lions. And I think it's going to look great. I mentioned the Lions are playing great. It's all working, coming together for them. Who gets the crown so far? I'm just going to have to stick with the Lions. I think they did the most with changing it, changing the blue, getting rid of the all grays. It all works great with their colors, the scheme about it, how they complement each other. I like the move. I think it's something else just to add on to the Lions winning the division for the first time in forever, winning the first playoff game since the 1990s, getting this team really as a contender. I mentioned it before. Jared Goff has said, we're not the underdogs anymore. People can start looking at us differently. I like it. I like them now really making this new group, this new era official with these new uniforms. When people look back on it, something else that people don't really talk about with uniforms is that you think of these uniforms when you're thinking of the good times that these teams can provide. That's something that the Lions, I'm sure, have talked about. They're sort of in the same mindset, and now they really feel good about this team. Let's drop new uniforms to get even more people in, buying the jerseys, getting more nostalgia, getting more connected to this team. It's all working great for the Lions. And them, unlike the Broncos a little bit, you could expect a little bit more success on the field with these new uniforms. Hopefully there's more teams coming out with new uniforms or new something out there. I always like looking at it and reacting to it. I think it adds a different dimension if you already couldn't tell. But those are two of the newest uniforms that have dropped. Let me know what you guys think of them. Do you hate them maybe? Not as excited as I am about these new uniforms. Which one's your favorite? Do you think more are coming out? Put it all down in the comments below and react to it on my reactions or leave it in the chat box as well. But in saying that, in reacting to all of that, that will do it on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I want to thank you guys for tuning in, and please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as making sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok for more of this network's content. If you want to see more of me and more of this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel on YouTube and the GSMC Podcast Network on YouTube as well, where YouTube Shorts are posted every weekday. All the live full show recordings are on there as well. Or if you just want to see certain segments, if you miss a certain segment or want to catch up on one, individual videos of those segments are all posted as well from the live shows. Remember to tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL conversations and football discussions we like to have on here with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host. Thanking you guys once again, and I hope to see you guys all back here again tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.